A second welcome from me. Wonderful you are there. I think you are all sitting on these small islands. Are you feeling isolated? No? Good. I'm happy to hear that. Because we are 25, 32, 40. The number of people who were allowed to this evening changed a lot over the last few weeks, but we are very happy that you are here. A special welcome to our authors who will be here not only live, but also at the screen. Guido Snell and I are welcoming you because you are coming from all over Europe. We are going to speak about the theme of this European Literature Night. Literature, the antidote. Antidote to what? Well, to the life we are living at the moment, to the corona, to dragons maybe, as we heard earlier this evening. How can we imagine this world, especially in times of corona? That will be one of the questions we will be asking the authors of tonight. What can literature predict, if literature can predict anything on the basis of the experience of the past few months in Europe?
On the program are 9 writers. There were 11 originally. We had 2 late cancellations, unfortunately. But in a sense, as pitiful as that is, it means that we have more time for the 9 authors that will be here, either on site or online. So it has been said already by Daria, but it has been such a tremendous effort. I shouldn't use the word tremendous, I now realize, but it has been such a incredible effort by all the people involved to make this happen. And it sounds a bit like a cliche, but my God, it's been a journey to get here on this stage tonight. We have 4 panels for you, about 25 minutes each. We will surprise you, and we are going to start right away.
And you will be able to ask 1 question, or maybe 2 if the questions are very short, at the end of each panel. So if you have a question, ask them immediately.
Yeah, the safe microphone is right here in the front. So don't be shy after each panel.
First of all, may we invite Paulus Hooggatterer to come and, well, maybe sit here next to me. And we are looking at the screen. If
Pavla Horakova is online with us.
Somewhere, we hope. I will start introducing her, then she will come, I think. She lives in Prague. She is a writer, radio journalist, literary translator. She hosts a radio program on the Czech radio on arts and culture. And we're very happy as well to have here, in person, very courageous, Paulus Hooggatterer, who is living in Vienna, whose recent book, The Black Clock, De Zwarte Klok, was translated in Dutch. And you are not only a writer, but also a child therapist. Thank you very much for being with us here tonight, Paulus. Hi, Paula.
From Prague.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, you can hear me well. I just introduced you already. We enjoyed your marvelous film earlier this evening, which we showed in the aula of the university at the response to the lecture of the State of the European Literature by Philip Blom. Thank you very much for sending us.
Thank you.
Paula, we read a fragment of your novel, A Theory of Strangeness.
Yes.
We didn't read it completely because it wasn't available completely, but still, we enjoyed it very much. In your novel, you speak a lot about Prague, and one of your main characters works at the Institute for Interdisciplinary Human Research. Wow, yes. that is really a large field of research, isn't it? One of the questions your character asks is, what is the point of working? Because if you work all the time, you have only a few hours of freedom. Now, work, of course, has been a central issue for all of us. How do we work in times of corona? How did you cope with that? And how would your character have coped with this time?
Well, at the start, I thought I'd have plenty of free time on my hands because all my readings and tours were cancelled, and I thought I would have more time to write and read, etc. But all of a sudden, all the media asked questions: how are writers doing in lockdown, and what are your tips? Etc., etc. So all I did basically during lockdown was recording videos for various organizations and answering journalists' questions, etc. So in the end, I didn't get any extra time from lockdown, I'm afraid.
So so your character would have not been very happy with the more hours of freedom then.
Well, I don't know if my character would have, what situation she would have been in as an employee of a state institution. Maybe she would be sent home to work from home, and I guess that she would have extra red tape to fill in and forms, etc., because that's what inevitably happens in institutions like that.
Paulus, in your book, in your novel, The Zwarte Klok, The Black Clock, there is also a working environment. We get to know certain, well, doctors, medical doctors working in this hospital, doctors of the mind. How do they cope with this corona situation?
Does the microphone work?
Yeah, I think so.
It should work. It should work.
It should work.
Yeah.
Do you hear me? Yeah. The environment in the Black Clock is my part of the environment in the Black Clock is my working environment in my reality. It's a hospital. Distance isn't.
I thought so. It was the environment in which you work.
It's a psychiatric department in a hospital situated in a small Austrian town. And now I have lost your question.
What about work? Did anything change for you and for your characters as well? Suppose you had your characters in a Corona novel. What
time.
would happen?
In my real working situation, Corona. It sounds a kind of paradox, but Corona did not change so much. Children have psychiatric problems with or without Corona, and they get mentally ill with or without Corona. But this is one part of my answer. But of course, there are reactions of children and of their families to Corona. Children get afraid of Corona. They fear that especially their grandparents, would get ill or die from Corona. So it's both. Normality, persisting normality, and the dragon of Corona.
The dragon of Corona. In your books, the environment is playing a very important role for Paula, but also for you. Paula, in your book, the character who was working in this marvelous institute, which is about everything of our life, of our bodies, of our minds in a certain way, your character thinks actually that there is a link between the history of streets, the history of well, parts of a city, and the present-day atmosphere. Do you think the past of a city defines really, in a way, the present day?
I would definitely say so. The environment is immensely important for the souls of people that inhabit it, be it the countryside or be it an urban setting, and Prague being an old city with layers and layers of history and architectural styles and various things happening in the course of history, it inevitably somehow translates into the present and influences the atmosphere of the city. I now seem to have lost you.
Well, we are still in contact with you, so don't leave us. Don't leave us, because I'm going to ask the same question to Paulus. Your novel is really in a quite different environment than Paula's novel, the big city of Prague.
Prague has I think, about 2 million of inhabitants, and Furt am See, the town in my novel, has about 30,000 inhabitants. The difference, the main difference, I think, is transparency. There is another kind of social transparency in a small town. Mm-hmm. You can see things clearer, and that's why I was choosing those small we call sociotope.
But the atmosphere in both of your books is in a way, well, not the same, but it's in a way it's like a film noir. In Prague, we feel a little bit in a film noir, and in your village, well, there are a lot of threats as well.
Yeah. My novel is of course on the one hand a literary novel, on the other hand it's a kind of crime novel, and in a crime novel you have to have a threat, I think.
What about the atmosphere in your Prague, Paula?
You said a bit of noir atmosphere. I'm not aware of that, but maybe it is there subconsciously somehow. But in my book, there's a lot of humor also, and I think that humor is a big part of Czech's character, and also I guess that the city somehow evokes that humor is inherent to the city of Prague somehow.
Why is that?
Why is that? I don't know, because it's at the same time very quaint and picturesque, and that kind of cuteness is in a way funny, and also the way it tries to resemble big capitals such as Vienna. It is kind of funny and cute and sweet in that effort.
Pavla, in a sense, we are colleagues, or at least I am a colleague of your main character, because she is an academic scholar, and to me, your novel was also very much a satire on the sort of the sometimes, vain attempts that, in this case, human social sciences have in trying to understand, how and why we live together as human beings. And I was wondering. You have to sort of comfort me here, because, under the satire, there's a lot of distrust and a lot of black humor about how science can help us in these days. Well,
that satire is something that happened unintentionally during the writing. Actually, the character is more concerned with serious metaphysical questions, so to speak, the fundamental questions of life and existence and the meaning of life, and also the importance of human endeavor, human effort to know more, the quest for knowledge, etc. And at some point she concludes that whatever field of knowledge, whatever effort to know and learn, it is still very important, even though you end up in somewhere in a black hole or in a blind street. It is still important to gather knowledge and contribute with that knowledge to the overall wealth of humanity as far as thoughts, ideas, and inventions are concerned. So she's not skeptical towards learning, towards science, towards knowing, knowledge, and expansion of knowledge. On the contrary.
Paulus, you were talking about transparency in small-town life in your novel about a small town in Austria. But to me, it also was a kind of a combination of Twin Peaks and Natasha Kampusch. So, and you can't use
Austria
transparency in such plots.
Talking about Natasha Kampusch.
Yeah. I mean, there are very dark secrets, and I guess my question is, the crime plot, yes.
Yep.
But why the focus on this darker side of provincial life?
I'm afraid I love the dark side of provincial life. So
you have to explain.
Yeah, being a child psychiatrist means dealing with dark sides of children's lives, and you have to love this side of psychiatric work. Otherwise, you could not do a good job. So this is one part of my answer. The other is I think I love the dark side of human beings, and I love to tell stories about this.
Yeah, but still, I want to ask you why.
You should ask my psychoanalyst or my parents, which is not possible.
Yeah.
Before we turn to your question, if you have any questions, a final question maybe to both of you. What is it that urges you to write fiction? We have been speaking whole day, whole evening until now about why telling stories, why reading stories, and especially for whom are we reading and writing stories? Alors, well, what is it that urges you to write fiction? You do so many other things, Paula.
Because that's the best thing I can imagine. It's the most enjoyable, most exciting activity I can think of. There's so much more freedom than in any other of the activities I do, and maybe the ego is involved as well. I'm afraid to say, because the fact that you are the sole master of the world that you're creating is really satisfying. So, yeah, that's about it.
Thank you. And Paulus?
There is one answer which is not so popular and nobody wants to hear. I think we all tell stories because we have to, and we have to is meant in a scientific sense. I don't know if anyone knows Daniel Stern, who was a famous American child psychologist, and Daniel Stern watched babies. Well, he was one of the first baby watchers, and he saw that babies liked narrative patterns. and he patterns who start and have a climax and then a decrease. And he told these patterns proto-narrative envelopes. And we all have those proto-narrative envelopes in our genetic fundament. This is not so romantic, but it's for me it's a kind of optimistic basis of my own writing. And the other part of my answer is, in my own childhood, I was told stories by my father, by my mother, by my uncles, by my aunts, and those storytellings in my environment. I think this is the fundamental basis of my own storytelling.
Thank you very much. A question. If you have a question, you can quickly run to this microphone here. Keep your distance. There is a nice, place indicated where you can stand. Do not hesitate. I know the first question is always extremely difficult, especially when you have to get up. The second question. Nobody? Yeah. Please come here, and you can quietly talk into the microphone without touching us. Yes.
Luckily, it's the second question.
Yes, so. Indeed, it helps a lot, always.
A question for Paulus. In your experience as a child psychologist, maybe this is a question that you get more regularly, but what do you think is the effect of corona on children, and perhaps also children of different ages, and what the effects would be, and how long-lasting do you believe these effects will be?
Thank you very much.
Very, very difficult, and I can try. First of all, children are rationalists, and they deal with corona in a very rational way. Yeah, so they at least in Austria, they wear masks. They keep social distance, and are not afraid of getting corona themselves. Second, they are afraid that. To repeat it, that their parents and especially their grandparents get ill and die from corona. This we can see, and the most important thing, and this is widely known in child psychiatry, is that the loss of work of children's parents, the loss of income, so the social effects which result from corona are the main thing children have to deal with, and these things just have started, I think, and we have to deal with those things during the next years, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much, Paulus. Thank you very much, Paula. Paulus and Paula. Don't go away. Watch us until the end of the evening, I hope. Stay with us, and we'll come back to you at the end of the evening. Thank you very much for joining us live and online. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are now beginning our second panel, which is fully online. I hope we can see our two guests, Thomas Weisseta and Monique Schwitter. Are you online with us?
Good evening.
Hello, Thomas.
Good evening from Orwellian Big Brother screen.
Yes. And Monique, we can see you too.
Good evening from Hamburg.
Welcome, welcome. Let me first introduce you, and then. But perhaps first I should ask Monique. You almost made it to Amsterdam.
Yeah.
How are you feeling now?
Well, better than yesterday. Yeah, I'm quite good. I was just afraid of getting in touch with somebody, and I didn't know what it really is about. So I was careful and stayed here. And yes, I feel much better now.
Good to hear, and it's very nice to at least to meet you on screen. Let me introduce you. Monique is originally from Switzerland, but has lived for 20 years in Germany and had a very wonderful career as an actress. She played in several of the major theater houses in Germany. And we know her here in the Netherlands because of one of her books that was translated. And the English title would go The 12 Apostles of Love. Thomas is a writer and a historian from Vilnius in Lithuania who published 2 books of fiction, and we received a wonderful, wonderful part from your novel Orpheus in English translation, and I must say that as Monique's book, I hugely enjoyed it. Maybe, Monique, I can start with you and refer back to your life as an actress, because, of course, the obvious question would be, how have you as a writer been dealing with in the past few months? But I'm sure that you have been thinking of your former colleagues in the theater, because one of the sectors most hit by the regulations all over Europe have been our theaters.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I've been thinking of them a lot. I have been remembering myself being a theater student and the importance of getting in touch with others. I mean, what is acting without any physical interaction? Social distancing on stage is, I would say, impossible. Maybe it is possible, but is it acting then? To me, I was always highly interested in dramatic processes, how people behave in a specific space and situation and relationship and state of mind, how they act, and especially how they react on other people. So yes, I think it really is a drama. It is horrible for anybody who starts being an actor. And I've been thinking of all these students, especially these days.
Yeah. Thomas, before we will discuss your work as a writer of fiction, you also are a historian, and some of your work has been about the phenomenon of boredom under Soviet life. And I was wondering if this research somehow helped you to understand the state of mind that we have been in the past few months. Has it been boredom? What has it been?
Are you boring in this period? I'm not bored, actually. I would like to choose more boring life than it is at the moment, actually. But yes, I would say in some sense we could say that the concept of boredom could explain what is in the situation now in the whole world. Because as I understand the boredom, as a lot of, I know, sociologists or psychologists understand that boredom, it's a situation when you feel meaningfulness. You can't find, you feel a lack of meaningful. You can find a meaning to life, and you are trying to escape that state of mind. So in this situation, especially particularly in the situation of quarantine, we all feel a lack of meaning to life. So we are trying to escape, but it's impossible. You know, it's a situation when it's impossible to escape, because the only way to escape the coronavirus at the moment is to, I don't know, to leave the Earth, to go to on moon, or to go to Mars or something like that. So we could talk about boredom, but I would say it's much more complicated situation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll get back to that. I mean, it's It is thought-provoking to, I mean, our whole effort as writers, as scholars, to understand what has been happening to us. Monique, in your novel, which starts with the main character Googling the life of one of her past lovers, and she discovers that the man committed suicide. And then she embarks on a kind of journey in her memory and in her past, trying to revisit the several loves of her life. In Thomas's novel, are you still with us? Ah, you're here, yes. I was a bit puzzled by the various screens. In Thomas, in your novel, which is in fact also a novel about love, I hesitate to call it a love novel. We find, allusions to, of course, the title says it all, the myth of Orpheus, the descent in the underworld and the attempt to rescue the deceased beloved. But it is also a book in which the contrary happens. The Orpheus in the second part is bedridden, becomes ill, and his fate is rather dark. So the two of you have written books that are dealing with intimacy and with the question of how do we connect to each other. And I'd be really curious to hear from you, from both of you, if you dare to give us some kind of future image of how we will relate to each other, not especially in our love lives, but talking about intimacy at large. How do you see this? Perhaps, Monique, the question first to you.
Yeah, I think the question of connection versus isolation is one of the main questions we have to deal with, all of us. As we see tonight, we are separated, but we are connected in a way. I'm not sure if it is the best way, but I think it is worth trying out these ways of communication and of intimacy, maybe also intimacy. Yes, is it possible to really get close to each other in new ways or in different ways? I think now I'm talking to you as a writer, not as a former theater woman. As a writer, I think we have a huge interest in every possibility to get into touch, to be connected without physical presence. So during the last month, I was very involved with exactly this field. But you were asking for the future. What is the future going to bring? And I think we don't know. But one thing that I know is that the question if what we think or what we do comes first. So it is what all the ideas that we have, all what we are able to express and to write down, do they have these ideas or do they have any consequences on our lives? And I'm convinced they have. So I think whatever we can do to try to overcome isolation and loneliness these days and in the future is maybe our main project.
Thomas, what would you say?
I would say that the question, what would be the future, is the most important at the moment, it seems to me. But what I want to say, what I'm afraid the most is a radical desire for a better life, which I see in our society, I mean a global society. Dystopian thinking that we can or could not simply improve our imperfect world step by step, but we should make the radical leap into a brand new world. That's why I mentioned Orwellian Big Brother at the beginning. You know, in the wake of pandemic, when quarantine was imposed everywhere and we had to pause our life for a minute, I was surprised how many thinkers, philosophers, and also writers, of course, very rapidly started to declare how they hate our previous normal, intimate life, actually, and how they wish that it would be totally different afterwards. I'm afraid of that way of thinking because utopian thinking always leads us to a dystopian reality, actually. I hope you understand me right, of course, but what is happening is a tragedy, of course. It's a disaster, social, cultural disaster. We have a huge loss and so on. People are dying, they are sick and so on. But it also, this utopian thinking, this radical desire for a much better life, could lead us to even bigger catastrophe if we decide that we hate our previous normal life, actually. Our reality, our normality is imperfect, of course, but it's because we are, as a human, are imperfect. If we try to change our reality, it doesn't mean that we will change. It means we will still be imperfect. And we have to, I know, we have to remember this thing when we're talking about our social life, but also when we're talking about our intimate life. We, as a human, without our intimate life, we are not human, actually. You know, so we have to share it. We have to save this imperfect, intimate life, but also social life too.
I would like to ask both of you a question about the relations of power, actually, because you studied theater directing also, Monique, I know, and you studied Shakespeare. This must have been a very interesting period while you were studying Shakespeare, because it's all about the relations of power, cruelty. And I would like to ask you as well, Thomas, as a historian and a specialist on Soviet everyday life, I think in the present situation, you are from Lithuania, you are very near to everything what's happening in Russia, and the world, well, is really upset by a lot of things, by relations of power at the moment. Do you think that the power should be at the center of your writing? And if so, do you express yourself through writing, or do you consider that writers, well, should not speak about that at all? Monique?
Well, I'm not sure that I got your question. What do you mean by power? Do you mean political power, or do you mean power structures within relationships?
I mean, our stories, the storytellers, how do you choose your subjects? Is it in relationship to what is happening in the world, or do you consider that the writer is free to choose any subject at all and free in every aspect?
Well, both of them. I think, of course, we should be as free as possible to choose whatever we have to choose. And when I say whatever we have to choose, it also means that, of course, we are not only influenced, but we are what we live, what we read, and what we are a part of the world, of course. So I think it is not possible at all to write an important story that has nothing to do with the world, with society and politics. And for me especially, I was always extremely interested, and you mentioned Shakespeare. Yes, I was always interested in power structures and in power shift, how it slowly, sometimes how it rapidly moves, what power means, and what it has to do, what it also has to do, for example, with intimacy and love and living together. So yes, for me it is impossible to think over writing or storytelling without dealing with the question of power.
Mm-hmm. And Thomas, how is that for you? For instance, in Orpheus, your character Anna is still having difficulties with her past because she lived the events in 1991 when Lithuania became independent from Russia. Is it a topic you cannot avoid?
Absolutely. I would be happy to say that my novel is about, love triangle, about love. Actually, it's not about love, it's about incapability to love. But actually, it also has a very different line. It's also about anticipation of war. Or if you want to, you can say in a broader sense, it's anticipation of catastrophe, of disaster, of crisis, instability. I don't know what about, people in the Netherlands, what they are experienced, but in Lithuania, we again and again are forced to live in the state of anticipation of war or crisis. At the moment, actually, you mentioned Russia, but I would like to mention Belarus. At the moment, there are protests are going on in the Belarus. It's a very tragical situations. People are repressed, people are beaten, people are intimidated just because they want fair elections, And sometimes, when I was writing Orpheus, a novel, I was decided that I will write only about that love triangle. But then the Euromaidan in Ukraine started at the moment. The unrest or protests began in Ukraine, and I just understand that I cannot leave it aside. I have to write about it also. That's why my book was also about this anticipation of war. Actually, sometimes I think that we in Lithuania, or maybe also in some other, Central Eastern Europe, we live in the state of this anticipation of the war, of the crisis, as it is as our, I don't know how to say it, it's like our existential destiny. We live like in the sea of anxiety always. We experience the waves of threats and alarm, then everything calms down. Then again, we experience another wave of threats of war actions or something like that. Orange Revolution in Ukraine, then war in Georgia, then again, Euromaidan in Ukraine, and now Belarus, actually. And my narrator in the novel Orpheus, when he encountered this unrest, this instability, first of all, he follows the events accurately, but finally he decides to pay no attention to it, to disregard it. And this disregard, this ignoring is a thing that terrifies me the most, actually, in my country, but also in other countries, to disregard the terror, to disregard the violence, to disregard the people's wish to have such a simple thing as a democratic elections. We all do disregard it at the moment, actually, and I think we should do something more than we are doing at the moment to help people of Belarus. And I hope I answered your questions, that I care about these things very much, and I cannot ignore this thing. I cannot disregard it. I have to write about it.
Of course. Thank you very much. I'm looking at our audience because we have time for one or two questions. Please do not hesitate. It will be the third question. Yes, please come over here.
I was interested to hear, Thomas, about both your anti-utopian sentiment, but simultaneously your support for Belarus, because you could see those as contradictory, right? The Belarusian people demanding for quite a different future than the future they have had. So how do you? Well, I'm sure it's not contradictory to you. So how do you reconcile those two things, like your distrust of utopia, but simultaneously your support for these kind of movements? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Well, I don't know if you understand me right, but what I think that what Belarusian people want at the moment, it's not a utopian thing. They want just only normal life as we have in our democratic countries. It's nothing related with utopia. It's a very simple thing to have a fair election, to have a fair elected president, and to have a right to vote and to elect your president. I mean, where do you see here any utopians? It's just, it's a normal life. I hope you in Netherlands, you have this life. We in Lithuania, we also have this normal. It's not utopian life.
Is there a fourth question, maybe? If not, no? If not, I really thank you very, very much, Monique and Thomas. For you as well, please stay with us until the end of the evening. And thank you for now for answering our questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We go along, we go further. And I am inviting Natalia Zoulay to join me, to join us. There you are, Zoulay. Thank you very much for being with us here from Paris, courageous by train. And we welcome Juan Gomez Barcena, online, hopefully. We saw him earlier already when we had a lot of writers on the screen.
Yeah,
yes.
There he is. Yeah.
Hello, Gomez.
Good evening.
How are you? Juan.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I am very well, thank you.
Nice to see you again. Hi. I will just shortly introduce you. You're a Spanish writer. You studied comparative literature, philosophy, and history. The Sky Over Lima is your first novel. It was translated into Dutch recently, or last year. But since then, you published 2 more novels, one of which is entitled Canada. It's a novel about the aftermath of the Second World War, and it will be published shortly in Dutch as well. Natalia Zoulay is a French writer. Personally, I was very impressed by her novel Titus n'aimait pas Bérénice. Titus didn't love Bérénice. We'll speak about that later. The novel focuses on Jean Racine in a way and a present-day couple. Let's say it like that. But in a broader sense, you are observing the place and the role of women in our society, especially in your most recent novel, Juvenia. It's a kind of utopia. Well, okay. He's just left us, Thomas, but it's a kind of utopia full of satire and humor, I would say. Now you have something in common, Juan. Are you with us? Yes. Juan, because in both of your novels you refer, well, not in all of them, of course, but in the ones I mentioned, you refer to a great writer in literature, Juan Ramon Jiménez, to whom you are referring in your novel The Sky Over Lima. Juan is a laureate of the Nobel Prize for his lyrical poetry of the French concept of pure poetry. Well, let's keep aside what that means, but okay. You stage him, you give him the floor, he's a character in your novel. And in your novel about Racine, you also give the floor, you follow, in a kind of biographical way, Nathalie, Racine in his century. Why did you choose these big literary names? What is the function of Jiménez in your novel, and why Racine in your novel? Nathalie? Yeah?
Oh. I chose Racine because I wanted to write about love, and I wanted to write about a very sad love story, because the principal character has been left by her lover, and she was really in a very bad state, and she went through depression. And at a moment, she wanted to find an antidote, and she started to read some plays by Racine, who is a very famous French playwright who wrote during the 17th century about love, about tragic love. And luckily and hopefully for the character, reading Racine helped her to go over her depression. Well, it wasn't that quick, but she started to recover, and she met some other characters who were, Racine characters, and these women in these plays that happened, in the ancient times, helped her to understand what she went through. And I chose Racine because he's a man, and I wanted a woman. I wanted to reconcile this woman who has been very hit, by love and by a man. I wanted her to renew a relationship with men through this author. That's why I chose him. But mainly I chose him because I like him. I like his work, and also because in France he's a statue. He's a marble statue, and I wanted to give him, some more flesh, and to take him as a child, because the novel starts when he's he's 10 years old, and I wanted to see what a writer goes through since he's a child, even though it's in the 17th century.
Thank you so much. Juan, you also wrote about a very big literary name. What was the purpose of his being in your novel?
Well, good evening. To be honest, at the beginning I was not so interested in Juan Ramón Jiménez. Of course, I knew the poet and his poetry, but it's not my favorite poet at all. But I heard an incredible story about him when I was at the school. And in 1904, Juan Ramón Jiménez started to receive letters from a girl, a young Peruvian girl called Georgina Humner. And he fell in love, but he didn't know that Georgina didn't exist at all. It was two young Peruvian poets who pretended to be a young lady, and they were writing letters to him, pretending to be this girl. When I heard about this story, it was incredible for me. It's like, I don't know, similar to the situation now with internet and the possibility to be a different people, a different person in the screen. And I decided to write about this real episode, not thinking about Juan Ramón Jiménez. I was much interested to think what is the reasons of the jokers, why they tried to do this thing, to pretending to be a different a girl, and what they were trying to get from Juan Ramón Jiménez. So my book is set in Peru, in Lima, and the main characters are José and Carlos, the jokers of this episode.
Now, there is a movement in both of your novels, if I may stay with these novels, a movement from poetry to real life, in a way, if I go very quickly. Juan, your characters become aware of the poverty and the injustice in Peru. And then the literature they write, the poetry they write, is changing. They come from their cloud, they get their feet in the mud, in a way. The novel comes down to reality. In a way, Racine is growing up in this Port Royal, very well protected, until he goes to Paris and finds his way in the real world. Now, this is true for a lot of literature of today. Is this, according to you, what literature should do? Should it be engaged? Is it especially true for the times in which we live now?
Yeah, of course, but as for Racine, I wouldn't say that he left poetry. Being in the world, being at the court, at the French court with the king, and going through everything he went through, helped him to live and to have experience, and this experience turned into plays, into poetry. So I think, well, as for me, even if I'm involved in what I'm living, and even if I am very concerned with everything, literature plays the part of a fortress. So it's a citadel, and I would like to live within these walls all the time, but of course it's not possible. But and what happens with the corona is that in a very violent way, I've been taken out of my fortress. So I had to, to watch the news, to watch the papers every day, which I never do. And it was very violent in this way. And as for Racine, I think that the poetry kept on his way all the time, even though 14 years later, he's going to stop writing and he's going to be a courtier, full-time. But he will be back to poetry, and I think that poetry keeps on, always play the part of this fortress. And so that you have to cope with reality, of course, and it helps your writing. Without reality, you can't write. But you have to be very, very tightly linked to the fortress to write.
And how is that for you, Juan? Should literature be engaged all the time?
Of course, any writer is free to follow his own or her own rules. So I am speaking only in my name. In my case, in my personal case, yes, I think it's important that literature it's engaged to reality. My writing is always related to problems of the present, and especially I think it's really important express my particular point of view about reality. And of course, for example, the pandemic is one of the biggest crises that we have had faced in our time. So it would be, for example, a great time to write about. But that doesn't mean necessarily that I will write, for example, about coronavirus in a literary way, because it's not my way to work. Normally, I write about the past, and I use the past as a tool to analyze the present, not in a literary way. I use the past as a way to look and to understand our present time. So if, for example, in the future, I write, for example, about coronavirus, probably I will not write the word coronavirus at all.
Juan, if I can pick up on that, the two main characters in your novel, they manipulate the poor later Nobel laureate, and they deeply interfere in his life with their forged letters. So what I would like to ask you is how free, or are you aware when you were writing this novel, for instance, or perhaps especially the new one that is now coming out in Dutch? Are you aware of how serious and impactful your play with history can be? Because as a writer, you also, like your characters, you interfere in things that actually took place, in a sense. You deform them, you reformulate them.
Could you repeat the last part, please, of the question?
Yeah, I'm interested in the. I mean, I can deeply empathize with and also in the novel about Racine. It's such a great place of refuge to go to the past and to play with the works of older writers. But you wrote your novel in the here and now, and I now know a lot more, I think, about your Nobel laureate but it is a work of fiction, so you deeply interfered in something we call history. And are you aware of this when you are setting up your fictions?
Well, I read about this question, about the real situation, and the good thing for me is that there is not so much information about these characters. And I think I say that it's a good thing, because when I have a lot of information about an episode, you are obligated to respect, to say exactly what happened. And this is not so interesting for me. When I started to read about that, I discovered that we have a lot of information about one of the characters, José Galvez, because José Galvez was a very important man in the next years. It was a very important poet 10 or 20 years later. But I discovered that there was not information at all about the second character, Carlos Galvez. So I decided to do that Carlos was my main character, because I could invent, I could imagine a lot of things about him. So yes, my novel is saying in some ways what really happened, but then it invents a lot of things that we can't know if it happened in this way or not.
Thank you very much, Juan. I'd like to speak a little bit about Euvenia, Natalie, because it's a really funny book. I really hope it's going to be translated into Dutch, actually. It's a book, ladies and gentlemen, about a new law adopted in France. And
it's not France.
Oh, sorry.
It's a European republic. But
okay, sorry.
It's very
That's my narrow-mindedness.
But it's not
okay.
France.
Okay. This new law, which is somewhere in Europe, in a republic, okay. This law prohibits older men to marry women 20 years younger. Well, if that is not a very nice starting point for a novel. This leads, of course, to a lot of difficulty for men, and it makes some women who have been left by their older husband for a younger wife quite happy. It's a very funny book. It's quite a feminist book. In what way, Natalie, this novel is linked to the movement of Me Too? And is it only a satire, or is it deep down inside a little bit serious?
Both, because satire always serious. But I wouldn't link it to the movement of Me Too directly. But of course, it's a feminist book, because it wants to rescue some women in the society that are left and that are unhappy, because when they come to a certain age, when they reach 50 years old or so, their contemporaries, their men, as you said, prefer younger women. So they have to deal with this loneliness, with this abandon, with aging, and it's really hard. So thanks to the law, which is very feminist, they are going to, to take revenge, of course, but also to reorganize themselves and to find other ways to be sentimental, to have sex, to work, to be, to regain all they lost because of the previous situation. But I wanted to make fun of this. And Me Too is very serious. So I wanted to write a libertine story. It's a tale, more than a novel, it's a tale. And to see the way those 6 characters would deal with the new law, and to have a little distance with all these stories, even though they're very serious and they really matter. But the way I took it helped me to think it over and to find other ways to tell things. For instance, there is a young woman and she was married to an older man. And of course, the older man has a responsibility, but she had too. So I wanted to be on both sides and to enlarge the point of view and the perspectives on this problem. But I wanted to have fun.
Well, probably you had.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, Juan, I think, from the gender perspective, your novel is also exhilarating. The two main characters, they actually create a woman who doesn't exist. And in her name, they correspond with the famous poet. And when you present these characters to us, you also show them how they grow up, and because they are rich, they are of rich descent. Their fathers take them to brothels, and they have all the privileges. And then this is when they start to engage with real life, actually. I was wondering, in what sense, because, in a way it is a historical novel, but it is so much a book of today, in the sense that, that it deals with men and women. Was this on your mind, our today's perspective, perhaps the Me Too perspective?
Yes, I thought this book as a book in some ways about idealization, the idea of love, and how this way to understanding love is toxic. It's terrible. It was a reference for me, a very important influence, the film Vertigo of Alfred Hitchcock. Because in this film, you can see the same thing. A person who is inventing a woman is not interested in meeting a woman. He only wants to create a woman in a narcissistic way, to create what he has in his mind about what is the correct woman. So in my novel, you can't find the perspective of women. You have to imagine that, because they are always thinking only in his benefits. They are only with horse in looking for perfect muse in his poems. And of course, there is a very critical point of view in the novel about that. And of course, it's an historic novel, so I could only make this critical perspective in the narrator of the book, not in Carlos, not in Jose, because they were not conscious about that. They can't understand why reason they are being terrible with women. So yes, I like that you see that this critical perspective about gender.
Well, I like it that you wrote it that way, so that's makes a happy combination. Thank you.
A final question maybe before we give you the floor again is about storytelling, because the importance of storytelling is the central theme of this evening. Natalie, you wrote this story, this satire about the future of, well, this European Republic. Why did you want to tell this story? What was the urgency of it?
My age.
Ah!
No, not only mine, but I'm surrounded by other women, and similar stories happen to them, that their men left. And I wanted to think this thing because it's really hard. So literature and fiction and satire help me to focus, to analyze the problem, to make it lighter, to make it deeper too. And it's only a way to understand better. And to me, literature is a tool of knowledge. It's an instrument to explore what human nature is capable of, and what it can be. What can be, you know, the real human experience and the motivations after all. So, well, this is the reason why I wrote this book.
Juan, I know you have been writing as well a book which is called Canada. I haven't been able to read it because I cannot read Spanish well enough. But I was told it was a real European novel. It's about the aftermath of the World War. Why was it so urgent for you to write this story?
Well, as you say, it's a novel about Second World War, and it could be strange, weird that a Spanish guy, birth in 1984, and who lives in Spain, is interested in writing about a last period of time in Hungary. But it was strange because when I was writing about this book in Hungary, about racism, intolerance, and these kind of things, in this very moment, it started the problem in the war in Syria. And I could see a lot of migrants, Syrian migrants, in the Calais station, trying to go to Europe, and we were stopping them. And it was, for me, it's important right now, think about the past time, think about Second World War, think about fascism, because right now we are in a very, very dangerous moment in Europe and in USA, for example. I think we have a situation very similar to the 30s in the 20th century, and I think it's really important to think about that.
Thank you very much, Juan. I'm looking to you again. Please don't be shy. Yes, please.
It's really good for me to speak French, but I try my best English. In this book, what I found extraordinary, that is that that really Racine comes to life. He becomes human, and we see him. He has a voice, but I think that one of the main questions in this book was how comes that Racine, as a Janseniste, that he knew so much about women's soul and heart, and he wrote about, and he made marvelous portraits, Phèdre and Bérénice. I think that was one of your main questions.
Yeah, of course, because I wanted to make a new merging of men and women. So I took Racine because he understood that well the women, and because he wrote so well about their pains and their suffering and their life in general. So of course it's a mystery because he grew up in a very male environment in Port-Royal, and he didn't have any connection with women at this time. But after that, he became a womanizer. So he caught up, his childhood. So obviously he knew women, and he knew literature, and he knew antique poetry, and I think that his literature is made of all this.
Another question, maybe? No. In that case, thank you very much, both of you, Natalie and Juan.
Thank you.
Don't leave us. Stay with us.
Yeah.
No. But don't go to a cafe because.
We'd now like to invite to the stage Abdelkader Ben Ali and Pierre Yarawan. And we'd like to invite to the screen from Wales, Eric Nagal. Eric, are you with us?
Hello, good evening, and thank you very much for having me.
Hi, there you are. So good to see you, Eric. And please meet your co-panelists, Abdelkader and Pierre. It's quite extraordinary also to have you here. Let me first introduce you also to each other. And then I think we can have a very, really urgent discussion also. Juan was mentioning the Keleti station in Budapest. That's several years ago now. We now refer to that as a refugee crisis. This is, of course, one of the crises that has been ongoing. And I think your work, Eric, and your work, Pierre, and perhaps, although of course, you know me, Abdel, I don't want to frame your background, but migration is a core issue. Pierre, you are a novelist, a slam poet, and also, I understand, a freelance photographer. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's photography is rather a hobby, but
okay.
Yeah.
But more than holiday pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You were born in Jordan, the son of a Lebanese father and a German mother, and your parents left Lebanon because of the civil war in the 1980s. You came to Germany at the age of 3. There is a new book, also now available out in Dutch. It's called A Song for the Missing, but of course you are most well known for the novel Am Ende bleiben die Zederen. That's in English, The Son of the Storyteller.
Yeah, in Dutch it's De Zoon van de Verhalenverteller.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah. Abdelkader Ben Ali, you are a novelist, you are a playwright. Your work as a playwright was directly affected by Corona. Your version of Hamlet has been put on hold. Most of all, I think, beside all your versatile activities, you are just this very productive writer. You're all over the place. You're an important voice in the public debate in the Netherlands. You have your weekly column in Trouw, the important daily newspaper. And as Margot already earlier on referred to, you received 2 weeks ago a beautiful award, the Gouden Ganzenveer. Margot knew the English translation, the golden
quill pen.
The golden quill pen, and it's handed out to someone who has been of special significance to the language that we speak in this country and that we use in this country. You also are the author of a longer essay, perhaps a small book that is about to appear, De Reizigers van de Nieuwe Tijd, Travelers of New Times, which you wrote for the month of history. And we will definitely talk about this because it's a beautiful exploration, not just of a larger history, but also of your personal history. Eric, you are a... I'm not sure if I should say novelist. We're going to talk about your book, obviously, but I have questions about, what you have given to the world when you wrote this book. You are a poet, an actor, a playwright. You were born in Cameroon. You are living now in Wales.
That's correct.
You also you are a writer in the English language, but you also are a performer in Welsh, if I'm not correct, if I'm not mistaken.
Almost Welsh. I'm working on it.
Okay. Perhaps, Eric, if I can start with you. First question: your book, which is called I, Eric Nagal, One Man's Journey Crossing Continents from Africa to Europe. You basically describe your life from the moment you left Cameroon as a very young man. And you tell us the story of how your ambition was to reach Europe through Malta, but when you arrived there, the only option to go to turned out to be Russia, which was the beginning of, perhaps one can say an adventurous life, but it was a life full of adversity, full of cruelty, full of hardship. But also in the way you describe it in your book, it was a life of, on the side of your character, or perhaps you, incredible resourcefulness and wit and this power, this instinct of survival. So what is it? Is it the true Eric Nagal that you have been describing in your book?
Yes, that's the Eringale Charles of 20 years ago. You know, I left Cameroon in the May of 1997 on my way to Belgium. But when I arrived Malta, that is when I realized that I had been duped. So instead of transiting to Belgium, I was told I had a one-way student visa to Russia. And so my life just kind of moved from the frying pan into the fire. So although my publisher has described I, Eringale, as one man's struggle to come to Europe, I think it is one man's struggle to going back home. Because if you look at the time that I spent in Russia and how I finally got to Wales, by the time I came to Wales, all I had was my memory. I had lost everything. My country had disowned me. I had no name. I had moved from Eringale Charles to Osmili Majola Tanvani, you see. So it has always been that struggle to go back to Cameroon because I wanted to go and ask my father's family what it was that I had done wrong for them to literally decapitate me at such an early age. Yeah, so that is what the book is all about. It's one man's struggle to find their way back home. Yeah. But it took me longer than that. I only went back to Cameroon for the first time in 2017.
Yeah, thank you.
I was wondering, Pierre, if you, in your book, you were speaking about Lebanon in a way. And of course, we have always been thinking about Lebanon, but especially this summer with the explosion. How did you feel about that? What was the effect on you, on your family? How are things going now? I think we want to know a little bit more about that, if you agree.
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult. The explosion happened on my birthday.
Oh.
And I received a video from a cousin who was in Beirut that day. And I mean, he was lucky to get away. His apartment was destroyed, but he wasn't inside the apartment when the explosion happened. And the rest of my family is not living in Beirut, but in the surrounding area. So they are safe. They went away. They're safe, which is good. But you have to. I mean, it's kind of difficult to explain what led to that point in history of Lebanese history because it's too complex for such a situation. But you can probably consider this explosion rather an implosion and something that is just the Lebanese people have been knowing for years that the state has no interest in protecting the people, and this explosion made it visible to the whole world. With one moment that we are talking about a country where the people are on their own, and they have been on their own for decades. And even when the pandemic started, they started isolating themselves and buying masks even before the state started acting in any way. So they live in constant awareness that the next catastrophe might be happening in the next moment, and this is just a life in constant misery, basically. And this goes for my family in that regard, that I have cousins in their mid-20s, and they see no perspective. They ask me, how can I come to Germany? For example, there's no future in that country. So, yeah, it's difficult to talk about it on the one hand, but also to kind of talking and explaining things because it's an accumulation of historical events that have led to that point, and so this explosion is not something that comes surprising if you have read about the country's history.
Yeah. Abdel, you have some shared history with Pierre. You spent a longer period in Beirut and happened to arrive there on the eve of the war in 2005. Six. And I was wondering, back then you wrote reports for your Dutch readers, which were published in Vrij Nederland and later became a book. And what is interesting to me is, you know, this happened in the midst of when the world was experiencing Corona, and then Beirut was on the news, and we were all like, another catastrophe. And it made me think of you, of your time back then. And it also makes me think, you know, if there is such a thing as a European memory of what we all collectively remember about, you know, the things 10, 15 years ago that were urgent and important, I realized that I never ever gave a thought afterwards about 2006. So how do you assess what is going on now in Beirut and the current situation we're living in with Corona? Is there some kind of justice to what we remember as, you know, shared history in this sense?
Oh, that's a lot of questions. For someone who spent the summer in Beirut, 2006, I was there. I was there for love, and then war came, and I decided to stay because I thought if I leave now, I will betray my love. So if they bombard us, then they bombard our apartment, they will find us under the rubble, me trying to protect her. So the romantic image. So I stayed, and then apparently the war continued for 1 month, just for 31 days. And it happened in the lull of summer. You know, everyone was on vacation, and then they started it. I mean, there was a logic behind it. And the Lebanese, they would joke, they made these jokes about this war in the beginning because they said, oh, look what's happening. They always start a war in our country at the end of the World Cup. Because in 2006, there was the World Cup in Germany. And then a couple of days later, the war started in Lebanon. And in 82, when Israel invaded Beirut, it was also at the end of the World Cup, 82 Spain. But apparently then people found out that there was going to be a real war with a real invasion. And I saw how, actually it looked like Corona now. I saw how society can change overnight. Just change overnight. Just you see a city become a ghost city and a living city at the same moment. A city becoming very lively and very anxious at the same moment. It's like what's happening in Amsterdam, our European cities in a couple of months. We feel as if something very important is being stolen from us, the normal life, but we're also very, very much busy adapting to the new life, which is a life of crisis, and opens up vistas in ourselves, but also in relationship to other people that have not been opened before. So for me, living that war in 2006 was very much about humanity. It's about how in a country without a state, people become actors. Become a kind of proxy actors. They become proxy states. They become the medicine man. They become the storyteller. They become everything the state is not doing. So I had this woman I was with at the time. She had 2 cousins, and they had. I give you an example. And they had this travel agency. They did this very posh VIP travels to Paris. And then the war started, and then they closed their office, and then they crossed the street, and they opened up a small refugee center for all the people coming from the south. So they did this instinctively, and things that people have been doing during this Corona period reminded me very much of that period. Sadly, because I thought that it was a unique thing. I thought, oh, I lived through that war, and now you know, but what happened the last couple of months had something of being in a war state.
Would it be possible to go a little bit towards the importance of writing for the 3 of you? Because, Eric, I know a little bit, you wrote about your life. It's incredible. It's terrible at the same time. But in the end, you started writing after a few years, and you had awards in the UK. You made an anthology even of Welsh and Cameroon stories. Could you tell us a little bit, and I think the question goes for you all, could you tell us what the importance of writing was for you? Did it save you in a way, or is that really too much?
No, writing kind of found me. You know, when I was about 8 years old for a start, my brother bought me a book called The Swahili Songs of Love and Passion. And this book was in Swahili and in English. I loved this book so much that after reading it for a couple of weeks, I decided that I have to write a poem which is dedicated to my mother. So my mother invited my sisters and my brothers into the living room, and she said, okay, Ngale, you know, tell us, read us this poem. And I went like, dearest mother, you are as beautiful as the snowflakes of Siberia. Everybody knows where you are. No one dares. You know, my mother left the kitchen, she went into the room and she packed my bag and she kicked me out of her house. She thought I was making a mockery of the fact that because she was a single mother, many men came and left her bed chambers. So in that sense, my mother kind of stifled my creativity a little bit. But when I came to Wales all those years ago, people will invite me and they will say, oh, Eric, can you come and tell us your story? But I didn't understand what aspect of my memory they wanted me to tell them. So I didn't understand whether they wanted me to tell them why, as a 17-year-old boy, I had left my village at such haste. I didn't know whether to tell them how Pechadniki in Moscow had become a cesspit of crime, or should I tell them how I had come to Wales as a 62-year-old Zimbabwean. So in this state of confusion, I met a wonderful girl called Fazana. And Fazana was from Uzbekistan, Afghanistan. And Fazana was a victim of human trafficking. On their way to Istanbul via Uzbekistan, Fazana's father died. And they couldn't pay the human trafficker, so Fazana's mother prostituted herself. So these people would take their turns ejaculating all over her. But by the time they arrived in Istanbul, Fazana's mother became blind. So as Fazana was telling us this story, I went again back to my earliest childhood memory as a child, because beside my mother's kitchen, there's a huge Iroko tree. The tree is so large, but on the side of this tree, there's a small insect, the stick insect. Every time you see this insect, it looks as if it is doing what we call press-ups on the side of this tree. Until one day, the millipede stops and inquires as to what this insect is doing to this tree. So the insect tells the millipede that, you see, this tree has been standing here for 400 years. This tree has been blocking my sun. So I'm going to push this tree until it falls to the ground. And then the millipede looks at the stick insect and says, look at how small your feathers are. Look at how small your hands are. By the time you push this tree to the ground, you will be dead. Your generation will be dead. So the millipede walks away, and on its way back 6 months later, the stick insect is still there. So the millipede does something that we call in Bakwili, it shouts to the gods, Enulia mato, enulia miro, naraweya weya ma molikili kama. So in this state of confusion, the millipede demands to the gods and begs them to remove its eyes, to remove its ears, because it did not want to see what the stick insect was trying to do to this tree. So as Fazana was telling us this story, I started thinking to myself, oh my God, I thought I had it bad. But this is someone who has been a victim of human trafficking and seeing her mother having these things done to her, and eventually she became blind. So I started thinking of blindness as a metaphor. So I was asking myself this question: can blindness be desired? If so, what have those eyes seen to desire to see no more? And as we left Clandino on our way back to Swansea in Abertawe, I started noticing the familiarities of Wales and my country, Cameroon, and where I was born, the mountains, the seas, the hills. And I had this epiphany, and I wrote my very first poem, which is Between a Mountain and a Sea. And in this poem, there is a stanza that says, on a wet journey to Clandino, I'm washing away pain and longing. A reborn voice is crying between a mountain and a sea, where voices echoed across horizons and conversations on common things. Please wake me from my slumber, and this poem will be over, between a mountain and a sea. So that was when writing discovered me, and writing came to my rescue. And as soon as I found my voice, I started doing these anthologies with other writers, and that is how my mouth kind of brought me where I am here today with you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Yeah. Pierre, let me put a quote from your own novel to you about storytelling. At some point, the narrator says, storytelling cannot bring back what has disappeared, but it can make accessible what is gone.
Yeah, that's probably one of the central sentences of the book, and because it is about the missing. right? It's about the 17,000 people that have disappeared in the civil war and that still missing, and they are not being talked about only by the relatives, but the relatives are in their 70s and 80s now, so they don't have much time left to tell their stories and to speak about the missing. So this book is kind of trying to oppose the silence in a way, and it is somehow also by this book I'm trying to make sense of for myself, basically, of something that is so, I mean, when we talk about Lebanon, we're talking about a country that has, depending on which sources you look at, but let's say 5 million inhabitants. So when 17,000 people are missing, it's a huge number. And it is like a gap in I don't want to say collective memory, because there is no such thing in Lebanon. I don't know if there is such thing anywhere, but it certainly doesn't go with Lebanon. Lebanon doesn't have a history book, for example, that covers the years of the civil war, simply because they have not agreed on history. So when I write about Lebanon, it's I know I'm just adding a story to many other stories that somehow are coexisting, and if you are, especially when you look at history, because the books deal with the past, and the first book there's a lot of Lebanese history, in the new book there's 40 years of Lebanese history is being dealt with, but I know that all the stories, depending on which sources I look at, I get a different point of view on history. This is, and this is, sometimes I ask myself if this isn't maybe the most authentic way of talking about history is happening, ironically, in Lebanon, because it's a coexistence of stories and of storytelling. History, talking about history in Lebanon is storytelling. Depending on which community you are born in, you grew up in, you will get a different story of the past, right? If you grow up in a Muslim community, you will be told a different story about guilt and innocence, and the same goes for the Christian communities. And so it's what you have is a coexistence of stories, and this is essentially what history is about, right? There's never such thing as one true version of what has happened. When people agree on a version, and that is being printed, and that is what we call history. But if you look at it closely, it's much more than that. It's a coexistence of stories, and they are all equally true. And so when I write about this, when I wrote both books, it's much more trying to make sense of that country myself, because for me 2006 was in another way life-changing, because it was the first time I couldn't travel to Lebanon because of the war. I had my flight tickets, and they told me you cannot go, the airport is being bombed, and so I had to stay at home, and this was the first summer I couldn't go to see my family. And up to that point, I had been romanticizing Lebanon a lot, because it has been home, or second home. It has been a country I have only seen in summer. So when you go back, you only see the mountains, the ocean, the sun, the family, and you go back to Germany, and this is the country. So when this happened in 2006, it was kind of eye-opening, and it made me want to know more and to read more. And I think without this war in 2006, I wouldn't have wrote any of these novels, because all the research I did certainly led to a change in perspective for me, and to anger and to disappointment. And this writing, to answer the question, is maybe my way of dealing with it.
Abdelkader, you speak about history books. Well, Abdelkader will publish very shortly a personal essay, which is a historical essay in a way. You discovered in a way that you might have pirates among your ancestors. Dragons, pirates is a good evening for you. You studied really the historical sources. You interviewed historian. You linked your personal history to the big history with a big H in a way. what did this book, this study that you did, what did it learn you?
Well, it learned me that it's always worthwhile to look a little bit deeper in a murky past. Because I come from a place where there's no history. I come from a village. It's called Irelzazen. It's not on a map. I mean, it's literally a place where they would put a dragon, Hixunt, dragones. And the people, my father, my parents would never talk about the village. They would talk about the people in the village, but they would never talk about the village as a historical presence. It didn't really exist. And me asking questions about that village, it made them feel a little bit awkward because they associated the village with poverty and with a lot of. The reason why they left was because there was no life possible there. So I have very romantic images of that village, like Pierre has of Lebanon. Summers, hot, but also a place where nobody read books, there were no newspapers. It was just my father and his transistor radio and my grandmother baking eggs, and we going to the sea. And when I grew up, the village was left by all the people. They just left. And asking people about the village, they would always say, that village, why are you asking questions? There's nothing there. And by a coincidence, I was working on a documentary about a woman that comes from that area that goes back in search of her grandmother. I found out, somebody told me that, that this place, we're looking over the Mediterranean and overlooking my ancestral village. And this guy said, that until the 19th century, there were pirates here. I said, what pirates? He said, yes, there were pirates who would sit on the cliffs and wait for the European boats to come by. And when there was a thick fog, they would sound the lamb's horn to create the idea that there was a harbor. And then the European boats would try to anchor there. And then those fishermen would come out and get on the boat. And I was, probably one of my grandfathers was, having fun too. In the 19th century doing that. So suddenly there was history, and that made me feel like a young boy again, feeling like 12, so I have something of a historical background. And then later on I found out that this village was near a place called Kazaza, which until the 14th century was a quite well-known and important harbor in the trans-Saharan Andalusian trade. So Islamic Andalus and Western Africa. So it was a very important harbor, but it was also destroyed. So this whole region is about building and destroying, people coming and leaving. So migration was already ingrained in my ancestral DNA. It was there, Yeah. Why do you become a pirate? Not because you like to be a pirate and kill people. You become pirate because there's no food. There's the barren land, and you go out and you kidnap Prussian soldiers. So then I found out that this Kazaza was also a place where something very important happened that actually is very important for me for the current situation we're in. And that is the fact that something very important happened in European history in 1492 that till this day has a big echo. It is the fact that the last Muslim leader of Spain left Spain, which was Boabdil of Granada. He left for Spain, he left for Morocco, and he touched ground in Kazaza, so near my village. And when you think about this, it has big implications for European history because Spain becomes Catholic, and then you start having this border between Europe and Africa, which is the Mediterranean. And crossing this border, everything changes. Language changes, religion changes, everything changes. And why this happened? This happened because the Spanish Inquisition wanted that. Monty Python was right. The Spanish Inquisition wanted to get rid of all the Islamic influence in Iberia. Yeah. It led to this crazy notion of the purezza di sangue, the purity of the blood. It led to what we call nationalism in its most brutal, intolerant form that till this day is creating a lot of problems. So for me, 1492 is a very personal moment, but it's also a global moment. And I see Margot, you want me to come to a conclusion. And in my essay is actually addressing these issues because the fact that we have this border called Mediterranean is nonsense. Because for me, there is no border. I have a passport, I can go back and forth as many times as I want. But a lot of people, for them, the Mediterranean is like a graveyard, or it's paradise. And there's nothing in between. And I think that we have this situation is a shame.
Thank you very much, Abdel. I didn't want to stop you at all. I could have been listening for hours and hours, but unfortunately, we have all these authors who have been with us, who are waiting, withdrawing themselves, not having this bottle of wine they have on their desk. So let's ask them in for the moment, and let's also ask Natalie and Paulus and all the writers who were with us. Maybe they could go and stand over there and take the microphone, because we have this final question to all of them, don't we, Guido?
Yes, we do.
And maybe first of all to Eric, because I was interested to hear a little bit more about this journey. Eric, are you there? Yes.
Yes.
I'd like to quote something that Philip Blom said to us earlier. He said, "This is a very interesting moment for storytelling. Not the cliff, I mean, but telling stories in times of change. Telling stories when the paradigm has cracked and is shifting under your feet." Is this for you really, and it's a question addressed to all of you, is this a particular interesting moment for telling stories?
It is absolutely. But you know, I'm not in a state of despair. You know, since the dawn of time, mankind has existed on the brink. So therein lies a modicum of hope. Yes, but the importance of telling story, I think the onus is on us, writers in the house, to address these issues, not to build dystopian societies or utopias, but to be creatures of comfort, to give people a bit of hope in this dark time. But like I said, therein lies a modicum of hope in the fact that since the beginning of time, mankind has existed on the brink.
Thank you very much, Eric. Who is there with you? I cannot. Yes, Monique, what would be the answer to the question we raised earlier? Is this a particular interesting moment for writing stories? Monique is not hearing us, I think.
I'm very sorry. Yes, I couldn't hear anything. I'm very sorry. I couldn't hear the question.
I quoted a sentence of Philip Blom, which he spoke about earlier in his lecture on the state of the European literature. And he said this is a particularly interesting moment for storytelling, because the paradigm is cracking and shifting under our feet. Is that a sentence which appeals to you? Did you hear the question now? No. Juan, did you hear it? Okay. 1 second, because you heard the question, but we don't hear you at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
yeah,
there you are.
I have heard the question. Well, I think absolutely yes. It's a great moment to telling stories, but in a straight way, I think each time in the history is a great moment to telling stories, because each time has its particular point of view about reality, about the past, about the future, about the present. And well, I think we are not different in this way. We have to tell our point of view about reality as in other times.
Thank you very much, Juan. Thomas, did you hear the question? Did you hear the topic?
Yes,
yeah?
Yes, I understand the topic. Well, I think that after the crisis, I would say it is a crisis. The lecture would definitely help us to make sense of what just happened now at the moment. It would help us, I would say, to break a silence, because we as a human, we don't know how to live in a silence. But it would be actually afterwards Now, at the moment, I don't think that literature can play a significant role, actually. Of course, it helps us to spend our spare time. It helps us to escape the reality, the very disturbed reality. But I don't think that it is a main function of literature, actually. On the contrary, the literature should do the opposite. It should keep us embedded to the reality. So literature should not be a drug or shelter room. And actually, I think in some sense, I would say the situation which we are experiencing at the moment is a price that we are paying for our very much culturized, very much civilized, very much technologized reality and style of living. We as humans distance ourselves from nature so much that we lost any psychological tools how to cope with the problems arising from the nature, problems that are related to our very natural origins. And now you're asking if one of our cultural tool, literature, can help us to cope with this natural problem. I would say, excuse me, but it can help only very little. As I said, it is a price for our very culturalized life, and I think I'm ready to pay this price because I choose culture instead of nature, but are you ready? I don't know. That's my answer.
Thank you very much.
With that.
Thank you, Thomas. Monique.
Yes, I mean, again, I just heard what Thomas said, so I guess the question is, are we asked as writers to express ourselves on what's going on in the world? Is that right?
Sort of, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what I think, yes. We are, especially now, we are asked about to express ourselves or to express our thoughts and to send out signals and just to react on what's going on, especially when it comes to social and political questions all over the world. And I think we have mentioned a lot of them tonight, and so we all know what is meant. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Monique. Paola, did you listen to the quote of Philip Blom?
Yes, I believe it's tricky to tell stories as things are happening. It's always easier to tell stories afterwards. And humanity has survived all kinds of cataclysms before and has always managed to make progress somehow. So this too shall pass, let's hope soon. And I suppose we will emerge from this wiser, but will quickly forget all the lessons as soon as things turn back to normal.
Thank you very much, Paula. We have Paulus
and Natalie.
And Natalie, maybe you would like to respond as well. Is literature an antidote, Natalie? As the world is cracking?
Yes, of course it is, but I agree with Paula. I think it's very early to say, and we have to take time. But all moments of history are really good to write fiction and stories, so let's hope for this one too.
All times are good to write stories. Okay, thank you. Paulus, is this a special time?
Yes, it is, but you said the world is cracking, and I hope I remember it correctly. Philip Blom described the situation as the crack between reality and uncertainty. Do I remember it correctly? No.
He says, telling stories when the paradigm has cracked and is shifting under your feet. And he says it's a very interesting moment for storytelling.
But it's those moments are interesting for storytelling. For me, the main thing is this is a moment. This is not a moment of panic. This should be not a moment of panic, and and not a moment of thinking in an apocalyptic way. This, for me, the main thing is this should be, perhaps it's a matter of age, this should be a moment of reducing speed and of keeping calm and of taking our time for storytelling. And the novels should be written not within the next weeks and months, but within the next 1, 2, 3 years.
Thank you, Paulus. Yeah. Are there any questions in the audience?
Can I add something to this?
Of course.
We're talking about writers, they should do this, they should do that. I mean, writers always write, you know, sick, health. I mean, let them, and they will keep on writing. You know, they're like insects. You know, they bite hardest when you don't expect it. But the readership has changed during pandemic times. I want to say something about the readers. Readers have come out of this pandemic as looking for books, but even classics that gives them an idea, perspective of where are we now. You know, I can give you one example. You know, this might go. The book La Peste by Albert Camus hit the top 5 bestseller charts, you know, in the first 3 months of the pandemic. Why? Because people find out that media, that popular entertainment, that the influencers, that the politicians, they all have no answers to the bare fact of life and death. They cannot give you an answer. Literature cannot give you an answer, but it's not pretending it can. And that's what makes literature so great, because it invites you to create, to think for yourself. And I saw people suddenly embracing these books because they were like looking for literature to give them an idea of perspective and take them serious. And that's what literature does with readership.
You want to react as well, maybe? Thank you very much, Abdel.
Well, with so many smart people having answered that question already, it's hard to be the last one to add something that hasn't been said already. I mean, looking at the pandemic right now, it's kind of, what I think is interesting is that we're experiencing something as the whole world, and we know its history that happens. You know, we don't have these moments very often where we know its history while it happens. We mostly recognize history as when time has passed and we look at it and we see where it has led to. So this is what makes it very interesting to me. And when it comes to storytelling, I mean, we're living in times where, at least, or especially maybe in the past years, and with social media being more and more important and so on, where facts are being treated as fiction, and fiction is being treated as facts more and more. And one could argue that this is weakening the position of literature, you know, because. But on the other hand, and I like what you said, you could argue that it's, you know, strengthening the position of literature, because this is where people turn to suddenly to make sense of the world. And I don't have the answer to that. If maybe it's both, you know, depending on who you ask. But it's so I think there will always be a need for storytelling and the wish for stories.
There is a nice quote in your own book: "Fiction is a world taken apart and put together again." I like that a lot.
Thank you.
Are there any questions to finish this marvelous evening from all over Europe? No. Guido.
Then it's time for the last wise words, which is just a big, big, big thank you to all the authors tonight. First of all, perhaps a round of applause. Whether online, on-site, that's the new mantra, online, on-site. We enjoyed your works, we enjoyed listening to you, and I think we can take home a certain message, which is that reading matters. Let's at least claim that from here. And so a big, big thanks to all of you. And of course also huge thanks to all the people who have helped make this evening possible, the people from all the institutes in EUNIC, the people of the forum, who have done an incredible job, and just another perhaps round of applause for all the hard work. The people of the Brakke Grond, thanks a lot. Now, rumor has it that there is something called corona, but still drinks are possible outside of the building of the Brakke Grond. And I think we can all cordially invite you to join us if the sort of the space outside allows us to do so. So please be careful, but I think we can afford ourselves a drink.
But that's not fair now. What about us who have to download it?
Well, I presume that you all had a bottle under the table somewhere the whole evening, but...
And we will all buy your books locally at your bookshop. Okay.
Yes. So thank you. Yeah?
Goodbye from Wales.
Bye-bye from Prague.